Hello, humans. I'm Dale Kingsmill. Thank you for joining us. This is the weekly, monthly MCDM live stream where we take questions from the patrons and bring them to you. We are all here in person. Matt couldn't be with us, and you we let you folks know that we were asking questions about future products, future Draw Steel products, and we got a whole bunch of really interesting questions. And by the way, it's super awesome having everybody here in person. We just got done arguing about future products for about 45 minutes.
Yeah.
I have curated the questions, and the first question is from Caleb Flynn, which I thought was excellent and super fun. And it's unfortunate that Matt's not here to answer this because I think his answer would be really good. If each designer, which means each one of you, needs to come up with an answer for this, and it can't be related to anything we've already talked about. It has to be your own original nonsense.
Oh, boy.
If each designer were pitching their idea for Draw Steel's first big book adventure, which kind of bad guy or world-ending event would you pitch? And it can't be Ajax.
Personally, what I would like to see is a giant cosmic world-eating entity like Galactus.
Oh,
in
nice.
The
Yeah.
Right, like
yeah.
that's what I would like to
People
get
love
into.
Galactus.
Some weird cosmic world-eating entity that you have to stop. And like, it starts with you going to a place and it's not there, right?
Oh,
like
sure,
you're going to a manifold and it's not there when you show up, and you're like, what? Like, you know, like when they try to go to Alderaan in Star Wars, and it's what happened, right? Yeah. So
you know what that makes
stuff.
me think of is like, so Sithrion Aronazir like eats universes.
Yeah.
And so you're like, well, how would that work? Well, I don't know that this would be Sithrion Aronazir, but imagine if there was a product like Vasloria and it came with a town like Villain, right? And later on in your adventures, this is the new product, and you're going to go back there, and it's gone, but not like burned. No.
Oh.
It's where it's someone has taken this part of the world and this part of the world and stitched them together, and now this part's literally gone. It cannot be reached. It's gone. It's been erased, right? And maybe people don't even remember that it was there.
Yeah.
Except the heroes for some reason. That would be fucking cool.
Yeah.
Anybody else have any pitches?
Will you go first? Mine will feel more normal probably after this.
Oh, okay, fine. I want to fight the moon. I've been wanting to fight that thing for years now. So let's have the moon hurling down towards the land, and it's like, you got to stop that.
Listen.
Good luck, pal.
I think that's amazing. And again, what that makes me think of is this is deep lore from a game I was in that Matt ran. I played Levelis. Some of you may remember that. And what you learn if you're paying attention in the background, the things that Matt wrote, is that canonically the sun in Orden burns bright the way it does because it contains Sithrion Aronazir. It's her jail.
I see.
That's referenced in the actual human write-up, right? And so if the sun is the jail of Sithrion Aronazir, why does the moon glow? Right? What kind of maybe it's not a jail, maybe but now we're talking about a completely different cosmology than planets and suns and Galileo and Newton, stuff like that. It could be any number of things, right? Remember, have you seen The Adventures of Baron Munchausen, where they go to the moon and it's that very kind of like fairy tale, the king of the moon, stuff like that. Anyway, Jordy, do you have a pitch?
Yeah. So Dale, there was a campaign I ran for Matt that he was kind of fond of called The Condemned, and like.
I'm not familiar with it.
It's sort of a Suicide Squad pastiche, right? But one of the themes to it is they're basically being forced to track down the sage who's trying to figure out, why do the humans have so many gods?
Okay,
and there's a thing, spoilers.
I mean, even I don't know this.
Yeah, even you know this. Spoilers, if people find out why the humans have so many gods, bad stuff happens.
Bad things happen.
Bad things happen to like the Timescape.
Yeah, well, I mean, we might get to related questions.
All right.
I think those are excellent answers, and they make me wish I was working on this game, because those would be amazing opportunities for any writer or designer to sink their teeth into. Okay, so this is a question we got from a couple people. Are there plans to have rules for retainers? Are they going to be in the core books? And if not, will they be an expansion? And if they're going to be in the core books, how are they going to work? And will they be different than the ones in Strongholds and or Followers or Kingdoms or War?
Yeah. I think Jordy should take this one away, because he's
is Jordy Mr. Retainer?
Yeah, he's Mr.
I did an outline for retainer rules last week.
Yeah!
The TLDR for retainers is we want to basically build on what Flea Mortals did, right? We want a very quick way for you to build a retainer. But we want it to be more flexible to make it easier for a director and Draw Steel to run.
That sounds useful.
And so the idea we have is we basically have a a stat block scaffolding, like for the different monster types. So let's say a goblin. There's a goblin scaffolding, and you build a goblin scaffolding. You take the scaffolding. You take any goblin out there. You pull their signature ability, like a stinker. And you put their signature ability there. Boop, and there's a chart by roll about what their stats are. And so you can basically get any monster from the book that kind of follows certain rules. And then as you progress your retainer up at different tiers, there's different like abilities by role. So if you're a brute, if you're a hexer, there's abilities you can pick, or you can pick abilities from your monster type.
Wow. So do I interpret this correctly that like if I choose Goblin Stinker,
Yep.
right? We've recruited a Goblin Stinker, and they have the Goblin Stinker ability, but Goblin Stinkers have a role. But depending on our game and our party and how we recruited them, that Goblin Stinker retainer could be a brute, or could be a hexer, or could be something else. Is that right?
Well, if he's a stinker, he's a hexer, right?
Oh, okay, so it's built into the. So you're also
Yeah.
getting the. Okay, great, I get it. Yeah, that sounds a lot more modular and less work than having to bespoke make every single retainer.
And the thing we found this in a playtest campaign that James ran for us is like, you might randomly negotiate with a goblin and they're the last survivor to sort out.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, this was a stinker.
Right.
And so why do they turn into like
Still a
Because
stinker.
as I recall, the original retainer rules, each retainer was a bespoke, unique thing.
Yep.
There was the goblin retainer.
Yep.
And if you recruit a goblin, it doesn't matter what that goblin was before you recruited them, now they're this goblin retainer. So that's
is a
kind of
ninja,
mix and
I
match thing. Antonio Pedilla says, I remember vague talks about Orton having a living setting. Like the Living Greyhawk setting, where what happens in actual games, maybe specific events, would inform the canon in future products. Could you talk more about that idea?
We've talked a lot about that, about what are the different ways that we might be able to do that. And, we actually talked about Living Greyhawk today. Matt Colville was in this meeting with us and
Should've
brought
been
up
there.
Living Greyhawk.
What did he say?
And talked about like dividing the world into regions the way Living Greyhawk did. I don't know if we're going to be able to go that far, right? Like, I don't know what the future of a play program, if there is indeed one for Charles Steele, is like. But there are ways that we have through modern technology of tracking what happens in people's adventures and letting that inform what's going to happen next. What that could all lead up to and what that is, we're still really talking about right now. But yeah, I think we definitely want to be able to let people have an impact on the canon.
So it sounds like it's two different kinds of things. So like the Living Greyhawk thing sounds like that, like where you live in the actual real world.
Right.
That's what Living Greyhawk was, is like determined what part of Greyhawk your adventures affected. And then there's the kind of like the idea of a meta plot. The adventures just having a meta plot.
Yeah.
Right. Like like I remember, what were those the adventure path stuff. Like one of the criticisms of the adventure paths was that they were supposed to make one big adventure, but the way they were designed often felt like individual separated chapters. It didn't necessarily. But then this is doing that like plus, where not only is it one big adventure, it actually has inflection points where different things, the player's actions determine what the reality of the next adventure is.
Yes.
That would be great.
Yeah.
I know that I, as an Antipodian dungeon master, would love something like that.
Get ready, Dale. It's going to be very exciting.
I would love that. I would love that. That would definitely be exciting. Do we think, asks Reformed Hillbilly, could there be a post-Ajax Orton setting down the road? Or will he always be the setting's looming threat? This is a good question. It kind of dovetails into a couple things we just talked about. The idea of there being a meta plot, what happens after it. Is the meta plot the only plot, right? Are there products that are meta plot agnostic?
We were also even talking about the power level of Ajax in general compared to the rest of the book.
Yeah.
That's true. Like, in what context?
We were trying to figure out, like, for the monster book in particular, like, how strong is Ajax on a world scale? And it seems like, well, you said he was a 7, which I think he'd be insulted
Me?
by.
I don't know that I've ever talked about.
Sorry,
I don't know.
Dale. Pardon me. I thought you were somewhere else.
Is it me? If I'm saying what level, I think Ajax should be like level 12 or something. Like me, Dale, personally. But
well, Matt would not like that.
A thing we've talked about that makes good campaign design is the campaign's reactive to you. And so thinking about Ajax as sort of our most canonical boss at the beginning, having him level up as the players level up and having him react as in sort of a race is interesting.
Yeah.
So, if we kind of present Ajax as level 7 at the beginning of the campaign, but as you start to sort of challenge him, he becomes 10.
So there's like a canonical Ajax in the book.
Yep.
Right? That's like generic Ajax.
Yeah.
Right? Still Ajax,
Yep.
but kind of the multi-purpose Ajax for anybody's game.
Exactly.
And then there's the leveled up Ajax as a result of the events that might be like a experienced Ajax.
Ajax star.
Yeah, Ajax
And
plus plus.
in terms of like post Ajax Orden, right? If we are talking about reactive campaigns, it sort of depends on all of you whether or not there is a post Ajax world or there is a Ajax just keeps on, getting more power.
Or if we end up fighting against Cyber Ajax.
Well,
Yeah.
I watched all of the chain, and I was in Dusk, so I'm sort of curious. Like, is the question why do humans have so many gods related to a post Ajax world? We got a bunch of questions actually about the setting boxes. JBR and another user, Talrock, said, what would actually be inside a Vasloria box set? Is that just an adventure? Does it have more ancestries? Are there unique classes or something crazy? And what would come after Vasloria, if anything?
Go ahead, folks. We've been talking about this all day today.
I think the ideal for a Vasloria box set is to, of course, have some depth about, the setting, some nice Matt Colvillian language there. But I think a philosophy we have is should always be paired with things that make it easier to run as a director and things with mechanical interest. And so the Vasloria box set we're talking about right now would be the guideline on how to run a sandbox campaign and how to build out a sandbox campaign, how to deal with player consequences.
Is that the same as Sandbox, the same as like Hexcrawl?
Hexcrawl is like a tool you use for Sandbox, right? So the idea is the world is filled with possibilities and like you can kind of go explore and the world reacts to it. So Hexcrawl is traditionally tied to really, really fiddly survival gameplay. And so like we use the term to heroic Hexcrawl. Like you want the vibe of kind of crawling through hexes, but you don't want to deal with like tracking rations and things like that. You want to be able to sort of what's in there, and you sort of discover something, and based on your actions, the world changes.
That sounds fun. I like that. What would come after, if anything? If there's a Vasloria box and it does well, then what?
Well, we know of two other settings that we would like to make: Capital and the Timescape. So yeah, if the Vasloria box does well, I imagine that one, you'll see more stuff for Vasloria, right? Because it was like, oh hey, people want that. And I think the other lesson we would take from that is people like these boxes that we're doing. So let's see if we should make one for Capital, right? Yep. Which we already have some progress on, right? And then hey, probably the Timescape would come after that, right? You'd sort of get a little bit further away from medieval fantasy with each one.
Basically, kind of lead you into the water as we start getting deeper.
So I'm sure the patrons will want to know this. So let's imagine there's a Vasloria box set and it does well and and everybody likes it. Is that the end of Vasloria content and you move on to Capital? Or are you going to be able to support like multiple, how do you support multiple product lines simultaneously within one RPG? Because you folks want to do other stuff, I think.
Yes. Yeah. Well, so the idea is, we at MCDM are a company that is small, but has plans to, eventually grow.
Small but mighty.
Small but mighty. Yeah. And so what you would do is one method for this, right, would be to put someone in charge of the product line for Vasloria, right? So, okay, hey, Vasloria came out. It's a success. We know people want more of this. We want to support it. We want to give you the adventures to play in your world. So let's put people there and let's put someone there who is like the Vasloria person, right? And they're in charge of getting the products made, right? They basically do, what I'm doing now for the core rules, they would do for Vasloria Adventures, they would do it for Vasloria Supplements and stuff like that. The other axis that we have here is, of course, opening the rules, right? And making it so that people can create stuff in Vasloria and the fan community can support themselves as well, right? And share and stuff like that, because that's an important part. And it's also, it's important.
That's right. You guys opened your setting.
Yeah.
So like somebody like another company could make an actual product for Vasloria in whatever rule set they wanted.
Yes. Nothing would make me happier.
That's crazy. Like if that happens, that'll be remarkable.
They don't even have to call it Vasgloria or anything like that.
They can do what they want. They could steal half the names and they could do whatever they want with it. That's it. Somebody could end up with a more popular version of the same setting. That's crazy.
Vasloria 2.
Dale, you're making it sound like a bad idea.
I think letting the larger community, including the community of developers.
Yes.
Right. Kind of do whatever organically makes sense, and then let the audience follow the leaders. That's the ideal.
Yeah.
Somebody in chat said, "What about the other regions of Vasloria? Will we be able to someday go to Corsair or Kamara or Nagara or whatever?"
They're on the board.
They're on the board.
Hidden by a chair.
I think it depends on interest, right? So there's lots of cool ideas we have those regions, right? You know, like one of the meta plot ideas is Ajax is going around the world doing stuff, right?
Yeah.
And so seeing what he's done in each area would be great.
Yeah, so like an adventure, a big adventure that ends with you fighting Ajax could be like a world tour.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh,
where you're
JoJo
following
Part
through
3.
his- right. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, ends in Ix. He's trying to get Kazumok under his control.
Yeah. Oh. Ajax rides into capital on the back of Gazama. Like, we got a lot of work to do. Like, as those are the heroes speaking, it's right in my mind. This is also related to a couple of other things. Like, let's imagine somebody already has a little kind of like a local area that they've built. How difficult or easy will it be for them to take that local area that they've been running from another game and just drop it into Orden?
I think it'll be pretty easy, especially if your local area is sort of following the standard medieval fantasy. But Orden is huge, right?
Sure.
And so it would be very easy to look at it and say like, oh, you know what? Maybe it doesn't quite fit here, but it might fit over here, right? And so I think it's easy because it's a fairly vast place, and so even if you have a couple towns, you could look at a map and say, oh, you know what? This whole time you've been in Dalrath, right?
Yeah,
And it's because there's this forest up here where you've been fighting things that have been coming out of the forest, and it makes perfect sense for it. So like, boom, there it is, right?
It's important for these tabletop RPGs to have that kind of negative space kind of baked in to their settings. Like, you can follow this like setting to the book, the adventure to the book, but you still want to leave a little bit of room for like, well, what happens at your table in particular? What emerges? That there needs to be space for it.
Yeah.
So, and I think that there is plenty.
Yeah, we were talking in our Vasloria box set discussions that if we do a hex map, there'll be empty hexes, and there are guidelines for what they could be, and they could be, boop, you drop your town in here.
That's cool. Yeah. That sounds exciting. Well, now I kind of understand the relationship between the hex crawl and the open the sandbox.
I have a question, Dale. For Jordy, since Matt isn't here, Jordy is actually one of the only people to have run a full campaign in Matt's world.
Yeah.
So how easy was it for you to, at the time, do that?
Well, I made up a brand new continent that was hidden, and then like Matt was surprised by it.
There you go.
So I literally just took a riff. There was like Lost Island, like from Lost, inside the Maelstrom, and then there was like there were refugees from the rest of Orden in there.
Perfect.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah. So it can be done.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. That sounds like fun. I'm going to take this template, I'm going to stick things in here. That sounds great to me. Yeah, I love that. Aside from future major releases such as the Fairy Summoner book, do you have any plans? Or ideas for smaller, more regular supplements akin to Arcadia?
There isn't a plan to put out an Arcadia again, but there are plans to do smaller releases probably through Patreon first. Right. And then those things, depending on what they are, right, once they're finished, may end up like on our shop or, on our VTT, if our VTT is launched and successful and everything like that. So I think there are plans to continue to do stuff. Not everything for Jarl Steel is going to be a huge, giant release. And so you might see things like adventures, for instance, right? That, hey, they're coming out, and first we're testing them in Patreon, and then maybe the patrons get those for free, and then we also put it on the shop for people to go check out.
Might that
for free?
Might that include classes?
That could definitely include classes, right? Like we could do essentially what we did with the Beast Heart and the Talent and the Illrigger, right?
Well, I remember I saw a lot of people asking about, will there be a collected like class book where it's the Illrigger, the Beast Heart, the Talent, and a couple more classes for 5e. Yeah. So that could be the way the Heroes 2 book works, is that the patrons already got this stuff. Many of these things were already available on the store, but not in print. They're PDFs. And then the collection, the hardcover collection, is all that stuff plus some extra stuff.
Yeah, plus a little bit of.
As a huge fan of Jarl Steel, I would buy that. Samhain says, I know a couple of goblins who want to know, when will the operator class come online? So what is the operator, for those who don't know?
Yeah.
Because I don't know. I've heard Matt talk about it.
The operator is a mech class, right?
Oh.
It is our.
You mean like a Gundam?
I mean like a dwarven lava diver.
Okay.
Yeah. So it would be the kind of thing where these are things that exist in the world. They were created by dwarves, right? the steel dwarves, right?
Oh yeah,
Are
the
ones
high
that-
fantasy, space fantasy dwarves.
Yeah. So they created them, and now we these things still exist. And if you are able to find one and fix it up, power it, you can create it. And so the idea is, right, you
It's
can
Gurren Lagann.
maybe swap out different pieces of the armor for like upgrades, or so like, hey, my helmet does this, the chest piece does this, and the legs do this, right? And so that makes your class very customizable.
But it also sounds very mech fantasy.
Yes.
Right? Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. So that's the idea of the operator. And I think in terms of when we want to start doing these things, we would have liked to have done them in the core. We don't have enough page count. We don't have, it would never come out if we wanted to put everything. So we'll probably do it as soon as we wrap up the core. I think we want to start working on these other classes because we're excited for them.
Valentino Konjic asks, which classes will come after the core rules first? I think we talked about a couple of them, but maybe are there any other insights here?
I think everybody here is pretty excited to get to work on the summoner.
Yes.
I think that because it is the most different, the summoner, the operator are the two that sort of come up the most, I think, for us as what's next. Yeah.
We were fighting for that last slot between the talent and the summoner. And the reason why we decided to do talent over the summoner was because we're still trying to figure out like how squads and minions work within the game itself too. And once we had that locked in for the core game, we can basically utilize that in our summoner class. So, I mean, that if the game is out, then those rules are ready. So it'll be time to start cracking on it.
And I seem to recall Matt posting, I think even on Twitter, but certainly the Discord, screenshots of the operator prototype.
Yeah.
Did that ever get played? Did anybody ever try playing an operator?
I don't think anybody's played an operator yet, but we do understand how it works, and I think it's really cool.
Yeah.
How close do you, how confident are you in your current designs for the summoner? Like, is it, we're pretty sure this will work, or we have an idea that we believe in, but we don't know if it'll work?
I've got a proof of concept.
Yeah.
Apart from the summoner and the operator, anything else?
So I think, we've talked about doing a Gish, right? We talked about that a little bit. I know
What's the Acolyte? I keep hearing
Oh,
you guys talk about
that
the
was the other one.
So the Acolyte is someone who is tied to a being of great power who gives them power, right? Like a patron. But the idea of the class is that as you level up in that class, you become more and more like that patron physically. And so your patron might be someone like, let's say Gazamok, right? That's one of the, often I think we think of like the Titans when we're talking about this, right? Or the Kraken.
or like Cthulhu.
Yeah. And so,
or fantasy Cthulhu, whatever, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So if Gazamok is the person that you are an acolyte to, right? You might get skin, and you might get bigger, and you
hope I
might,
get skin.
scaly.
You get skin. Congratulations. How do I get skin in this game? You have to take the Acolyte. And otherwise, you're just like everybody else walking around without any skin.
Yeah, with no skin.
That's why people love Orden.
And
It's
you
like-
finally have skin in the game.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. 100%. Well done.
We also talked.
So is that how much, if at all, does that fulfill the Warlock fantasy, or is that like a completely different like an unrelated? Like if I like the Warlock fantasy, where do I go for that in Draw Steel?
So I think it will be right now the Acolyte, right?
Okay.
So
you're not just becoming more and more an avatar, a physical avatar. You're also a kind of sorcerer.
Yes, yeah. You have magic powers that have been granted to you by this person, and in fact, there's probably many first level acolytes running around, and
as
you
bad
don't
guys.
really know
Yeah.
yet, right?
As
You
bad
know?
guys.
Yeah. You're just like,
It
that
actually
person doesn't
sounds
have
like
skin; they're an acolyte.
With the
That's how you know.
summoner and the acolyte, which I can kind of imagine them going either way in a sense, but it sounds like future classes have the opportunity to be more explicitly anti-heroes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Not necessarily only classic heroes. And what are the the talents in the core books? Did we talk about the Beast Heart and the Illrigger? Are we going to see them in the future?
For sure, the Beast Heart is one that we want you to see.
What's going to happen to the Illrigger?
We've talked about a few different things that it might be a subclass or flavor of Censor, right? Where we talk about this is how it works, or it could be that they just share a lot of mechanics in common with the Censor and work in a similar way. But Jordy, I think you might have some ideas since you worked on the Censor.
The Censor already has a bit of the Illrigger vibe, right? So there's an ancient game design saying is sometimes a game design concept kills something else that takes its stuff.
Yeah. Like,
Right.
like
And so
the Censor killed the Illrigger and took its stuff.
Yeah.
Right. So we could imagine that the subclasses for the Illrigger might just turn into sensor subclasses in future products.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Fluff Hoftus. I'm almost certain I didn't pronounce that correctly. He says, are there specific designs or ideas or mechanics any of you have had for Draw Steel that, while they might not fit into this game, you are ready to move mountains to implement in future games? We get this question a lot, right? Which is that what stuff that you've had to throw out do you still love and hope to make a different game that it's good for?
These folks have not been working on the game for as long as I have, so I can go first. Well, give them a chance to think. Certainly, we talk about the cosmic die a lot.
Yes.
And there's actually still a piece of me that's like, is there going to be maybe a place in Draw Steel where we can find a use for it? Although we're doing a Dice Kick starter now, or a Dice crowdfunder.
Yeah, it sounds like that's the place where it would have been.
Yeah, that it's too late. So I'd love for the cosmic die to come back. In terms of, though, like, what do I really want to see again, right? I think a lot about this system that we used for conditions that didn't quite pan out. Where conditions,
the kind of analog conditions.
Yeah. They had like values, right? And you would reduce them by value and that sort of thing. And I want to see if I can work that in somewhere else.
Right. So describe that to people who might not have, because I'm on the Patreon. I don't remember that.
Yeah. So it was short-lived, and the idea was that when you got a condition, your condition had a value associated with it, right? So you might be frightened 1 or weakened 1, right? Or weakened 3. And then every round at the end of your turn, you rolled a d6 for any condition you had, and you would reduce the condition by that value. So sometimes you would clear it, sometimes it would, go down a little bit, but you were always making progress towards it. Right?
And was that D6 roll based on one of my stats? Could I be better at getting rid of weakness than somebody else, or was it always just like a D20, like a 4th edition save, which is just 50-50?
It was just like a 4th edition save, right? Like you rolled to see if you could shake it off, and that's what it was. The problem was, and this was probably the biggest problem of them all, was that what I really liked about it was you could stack them, right? So like, let's say you're fighting some group of creatures, bunch of vampires, they weaken you, right? So one does weakened 1, but then you get hit again and by a different one. Now you're weakened 2, now you're weakened 3.
Right.
Which was cool in theory, but then it meant that like, hey, if you're fighting a group of creatures that do this, you're just never shaking off the condition, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and so there were better ways for Draw Steel to do it, but I think for some other games it could work.
So are there any things that you folks, Jordy and Willie, have seen, the newcomers, that you're like, that was really cool, I'm sad that went away?
The career path.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, do you think there is a place in a future Draw Steel product for that kind of career path, or do you think that's better for a different game?
Well, I heard that Matt Colville mentioned earlier today that there might be a place for it in a future box set that we've talked about.
Well, we might get more questions about that. That sounds, I mean, I actually went through, I made a character using that career path and talked about it on stream, and it was really cool. It was your character ends up with a really complicated, you fight in several battles, as I recall, in this, and there are different outcomes, and you can get like medals, and there are all sorts of crazy things can happen to you, and they're all grounded in the setting. So it was cool, but also like, wow, it was a lot. Willie, anything that you saw or thought or heard about that you're like, that sounded cool, why aren't we doing that?
I mean, in thinking about it, I completely understand why we got rid of caster kits. Like that decision was very important to me.
Yeah.
I'm also very excited about what's going to come after that, now that we're working on more martial kits that'll better serve fantasies and are clearer to players, like what's actually happening in them, as it were. Would I like to see sort of the concepts that we did in those caster kits that we initially put out? Absolutely, and I can definitely find other places to put those.
I see people in the Discord asking about, what do I get as a caster that gives me the same amount and degree of customization that the martial classes get?
Yeah, so there's two things going on in that conversation, right?
Yeah.
And the first is that you do have a degree of customization right away, right? When you are a caster. In fact, casters kind of have more customization now, because as a martial character, you pick a kit, right?
Yep.
And we've just added a bunch of kits like the spell sword, right? So that, hey, if you want to add a little bit of magic into your martial, that's how you can do it. if you're a caster, right? Let's take the elementalist, for instance, right? So sort of the caster's caster. You have 2 axes where you get to customize your character that aren't limited by your subclass or anything else, right? You just get to pick these. So the first thing you get to pick from is something that is going to modify some of your stats, right? Some of your static stats, like your stability or your stamina or your the distance at which you can hit things with a ranged attack, right? And those are, in the case of the elementalist, they're called enchantments. In the case of the conduit, they're called blessings, right? You can take the enchantment of stone, right? Ooh. Which makes you harder to move, right? Increases your stability, right? You can take the enchantment of air, because air is the speed element, right? Sure, yeah. It makes you faster. It increases your speed. And then you also pick a ward, right? And these 2 things are independent of each other. So your ward can be like, hey, I have the fire ward, the explosive ward, which is something Matt Colville created, right? Oh, sure. Yeah. And it is, hey, when you hit me, I push you back, right? Or hey, I have a ward that when you hit me, you take some damage. Or hey, I have a ward that when you hit me, I get to teleport over here, right? All kinds of different things like that that are defensive, that discourage people from attacking you, as it were. So those are the 2 axes.
Mendel asks, I sometimes hear y'all say something like that would be for a different kind of game we would also like to make in the future. I'm intrigued. What kinds of games, both role-playing games and other, would you be excited to design that are not, so I assume the assumption here is not related to Draw Steel at all. At all. Completely original products in the analog tabletop space.
And not related to Draw Steel, right? I mean, people have probably heard us mention some things occasionally, like Crows, which would be like a dungeon crawling, because we love all kinds of games. We play all kinds of games here. Mm-hmm. For me, I really, really would like to. I'm very much into the like crafting survival type of computer game, right? Video game, you know, your Minecrafts, your 7 Days to Die, that sort of thing. I think that is a very satisfying gameplay loop, right? Hey, find some things to build a thing, and you get to build better stuff with the things that you find. And I think it would be really cool to make something based in that sort of gameplay loop with an RPG where you're working together with all your friends, you're building a base, right? And I think you could make that work for a lot of different genres then, right? And
that sounds kind of Valheim-y. I don't know if you played Valheim.
Yes,
Valheim is kind of like if they double down on the survival and crafting part of Minecraft.
Yes, yeah, exactly, right? And I think what's cool about that is it works in a couple different genres, as many video games have showed us already, right? So like you could put out the chassis for that, and then people could create, hey, here's the one where, you know, it's like Waterworld and everything's flooded. Here's the one where it's a zombie apocalypse. Here's the one where it's a medieval fantasy, right? Crafting thing, right? And you could do that sort of thing. So that, for me, is a pet project. I don't know if we'll make it here at MCDM or somewhere else, but that's a thing that I think would be really fun.
That sounds great.
Yeah. This would either be powered by Draw Steel or its own system, but I think a solid superhero game.
Superheroes. I love superheroes.
Yeah. Would love a superhero game.
Is there currently, like, in the tabletop RPG space, what is the market leader in superheroes? Is there one?
There are a few different contenders, I feel like.
Yeah, you know, so some of them are tied to IP, right? The Marvel games do well because it's Marvel, right?
Sure,
so, you know, people want to play Marvel stuff. But I think what I'm looking for is something that takes on the baton, you know, from Mutants and Masterminds, from Champions, in these games where you can construct characters, but can we do it in a more straightforward, streamlined way, right? So it's easier to run and easier to play.
Really?
I mean, if I had to think of anything off the cuff, let's make a card game.
What kind of card game?
I would say a plating card game, like, you know, your Magic the Gathering, your Yu-Gi-Oh, one of those.
Oh, like a CCG.
I mean, we've got.
What does a modern CCG look like? I guess Lorcana.
Scary.
I guess like Lorcana is the most recent example.
Yeah. And even that still kind of looks very similar to Magic does.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Yeah, you could think of like a Marvel Snap too, right?
Yeah.
Like there are things
we could do something.
Would this be a
more
physical
digital
card game or would this be a digital game?
I'd like to try to do a physical card game. Maybe even something that has more to do with sort of positioning of cards on the field, more so than anything else, because, you know, I like tactic and positioning, if you couldn't tell.
That sounds awesome. Yeah, I would like to see all of these things happen. JX asks, is MCDM planning on focusing exclusively on Draw Steel for the near future? Like, when's the first non-Draw Steel product?
This afternoon, right before this meeting, we talked, and one of the things that the company would like to work on, right? And again, we'll continue to support Draw Steel. So I think that's the big thing, is that like the team is
stopping.
The team has gotten bigger, and so we can work on multiple things at once, right? And so we will continue to work on Draw Steel and continue to support it and put stuff out there for people playing the game. That's really important to us. However, we would also like to make other products, and one of the first things that we might make is a sci-fi dungeon crawling board game that Matt and Jason have wanted to work on for a long time, called Derelict. It sounds really cool, and I really want to play it.
As someone with a few hundred hours in Gloomhaven, I'm looking forward to something new.
That sounds great. Yeah. Aside from the War Dogs, asks Keegan Pertel, are you working on any other custom monsters for the monster book? Let's assume that they mean like not in Flea Mortals. Right? What new stuff might we see inside the monster book?
As I pull up my Rolodex of monsters.
I was going to say,
for context here, who's the monster? Who's the monster captain?
Please call me the Echidna.
So I think Willie is in charge of getting the monster book done.
Yes.
There are a number of new monsters that are appearing within this book that weren't in Flea Mortals. For instance, the Raiden Whites in particular. Although it seems like no one really wants to fight the Raiden Whites, which is
they want to be
unfortunate. They want to be the Raiden Whites.
Well, I think that's a classic. We talked about this in an earlier meeting. I don't know why I was there, but it was the notion of like the classic superhero meetup, and the original one was Prince Namor and Thor, I think, right? Where the first time they meet, they fight. Right. And then you become friends. Yeah. Right. And the Raiden Whites are a perfect example of that. Is the first time you meet them, they seem like sewer dwelling kind of sinister rat folk, but they're actually cool and awesome.
Yeah. I love them.
But we're also seeing stuff like we're going to have elves and dwarves, of course, which didn't show up in
They weren't in Flea
Mortals.
Mortals. You couldn't. Yeah, there were no elf or dwarf bad people. What about the shadow elves?
The shadow elves are slated and they're on the list.
I can't wait. They're the bad guys from Dusk. And I want to fight them. I want to go back to that.
Ooh, me too. And we were also talking about potentially some new dragons. So
there was one last question I'm going to source from chat, and that's John Champion. And I'm curious to see how each of you weigh in on this. If you had to live somewhere in the Timescape, where would you choose? I know my answer.
It's good.
Somewhere in the Timescape.
I know for me the answer is Capital. That's where I would want to live, right? Because it's this hub of like art and culture. I think that there's obviously a lot of backstabbing, chaos, and intrigue going on, which I think is also fairly interesting, lucrative way to make a living. But I think the arts that are happening there, right? Like it's one of the only fantasy settings where I've seen like, hey, there's this is a place that really appreciates the performing arts.
Oh, sure.
Right?
Yeah. Opera is huge.
Yeah. And to me, right, like I want to live in a place where that's the case, where it's like, oh yeah, I can go to the theater and it's like I'm fighting to get tickets at this big opera, like that kind of thing. That to me, just seems like a great culture to be part of.
That sounds great. Yeah. Jordy?
Does Capital have plumbing?
Does Capital have plumbing? That's a good question. I don't know. That's for maybe Matt, but I don't know.
I prefer someplace with plumbing.
Well, I think that's probably the Timescape. Yeah. I mean, I think the Timescape is the most modern, literally modern.
Alternatively, I would like to be a high-level Fury who can make my own pocket dimension in the primordial chaos.
Is that a preview of an actual ability that's in the core of Draw Steel rules?
Spoilers.
Willie, if you had to pick, where would you live and be?
I mean, both my answers are cop-outs. I'd say that I am from Arcadia. Although, if I had to be honest with myself, I'm from some manifold with clowns in it.
The dimension of clowns?
Yeah.
The dimension of clowns?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, there's got to be one, right?
Oh, of course it has to be.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Is there a difference? What? Is there a difference in your mind, Willie, between a clown and a jester?
I'd say that a jester is a type of clown.
Fair enough.
And they're both a little bit different from a real clown.
How is a clown different from a real clown? So cover your ears. Bitch, what is a real clown? Are they just people dressed as clowns, or are they real clowns? That's a great... getting back to the question at hand, my answer would be I would love to be I want the Captain Kirk fantasy. I want to live and work on a Memenek starship and be the captain. That's my daily job, and I've got my captain's quarters, and I care about the crew and all that stuff. That would be A+ for me.
Probably have plumbing too.
They do have plumbing. Absolutely.
I changed my answer to plumbing.
It's fantasy space plumbing. Thanks for being here. Thanks for watching, everybody. I am your host, Adele Kingsmill, and I would like to a special shout out to the people in chat for the first time ever not making fun of my outrageous Australian accent. Until next time, be good humans. I don't know. I'm Dale Kingsmill. I don't know. I know Matt's sign-offs, but I'm not sure. I need my own.